The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Out of his fullness we have all received grace in place of grace already given. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Pacifica, students, I am now talking to you in case you don't know. My encouragement to us this year is that we would enter into the mystery of God's grace and truth in our lives. During college, I had the great privilege to study abroad, and my studies took me to Tenerife, Spain, where I met Gabor Toma. Gabor was a wonderful man. He and I had much in common, and we enjoyed our time in Tenerife so much that my wife, Dana, and I decided to visit him back in 2003. And so during our time in Budapest, it was very important to Gabor that we learned about his country and the history of his country. And so we spent much of our time there visiting museums and seeing historical sites. Our journey through Budapest took us to the House of Terror, a building that was once the headquarters for the communist AVH, which is the equivalent to the Soviet KGB. Today, the House of Terror is a museum for the fascist and communist dictatorships that ruled over Hungary in the 20th century. It's also a memorial site to the victims who were detained, interrogated, tortured, and murdered in that same very building. For hours, we walked the exhibits, learning about the atrocities that had occurred in this space and time by the Nazis and by the communist AVH. We read numerous stories about the persecution and murder of Jews, Christians, and anti-communists. Gabor, along the way, told us stories about his own family and the persecution and the hardship that they experienced during this time. As we were leaving the museum, serving as a final exhibit, there on the wall, I'll never forget it, were the pictures and the names of every member of the AVH who is still alive and living in Hungary today. I was appalled. I was so filled with anger and hatred. I stood there in silence. And when I finally worked up the courage, I looked at my dear friend. I said, Gabor, how is it that these men are still living in society with you? How is it that they haven't been locked up? I said this. How is it that they haven't been killed? I was furious. My dear friend looked at me with a flicker of hope in his eyes. Only someone who had experienced this could do, I think. David, we've seen a lot of suffering and a lot of death. And the truth is, any one of us was capable of committing these heinous crimes. What we want to do is extend grace and learn from what has happened here. Gabor has an unwavering faith in the mystery of God's indispensable grace and the mercy for all of mankind. He firmly believes in God's immutable truth, truth that yields freedom in our lives. Freedom that makes possible the forgiveness of the most heinous crimes of the 20th century. Oftentimes, we want to put grace against truth. If grace is present, then truth must be far away. And where there is truth, there must be no grace. My experience is I enter into one, I always find the other. There can be no grace without truth. And in the absence of truth, grace becomes very shallow. As you cheapen one, you cheapen the other. What makes Gabor's forgiveness of the AVH so profound is the truth that these men were convicted and tried of murdering innocent men, women, and children. Had these men stolen some bread or cheated on their taxes, this level of forgiveness would have very little meaning and far less compelling. The 20th century pastor and theologian put it this way, Mr. Dietrich Bonhoeffer: costly grace is costly because it calls us to follow, and it is grace because it calls us to follow Jesus Christ. It's costly because it costs a man his life, and it's grace because it gives a man his only true life. It's costly because it condemns sin, and it's grace because it frees the sinner. Above all, it's costly because it costs God the life of his Son. Students, as you enter into this next season of growth and maturity in your lives, your world is going to grow. You're going to discover new people, new cities, new cultures, and new ways of relating with the world in which you live. You will have new experiences that increase your understanding of joy and happiness. You will develop deeper relationships, and you may even, dare I say, fall in love. Now, at the same time, you will come to better understand the brokenness in our world. You will mature and understand that people are not perfect, that they make mistakes and bad choices. You may experience a dishonest coworker, a judgmental friend, the separation of your parents, or the death of a loved one. When this happens to you, do not lose hope. Do not lose faith. Do not forget in the darkness what you have seen in the light. The world is not changing and God is still sovereign. Rather, you are finally coming to understand and see the world for what it really is, a wonderful and beautiful place filled with people made in the image of God who are in desperate need of the grace of Christ. God's grace is limitless. It's lavish. It's always sufficient. It's always enough, no matter the circumstances. You can't you can't put grace in a box. I can't tell you exactly why it happens, and I certainly can't tell you when it happens. But I know we can receive it. I know we can enter into it. I know we can celebrate grace, and I know we can give it away. God gave us grace through Jesus Christ, and through him, he also gave us truth. C.S. Lewis wrote, "Human history is the long, terrible story of man trying to find something other than God which will make him happy." And we've been doing this for thousands of years. St. Augustine said it this way, "Thou, O Lord, didst create us for thyself, and our hearts are restless until they find their peace in thee." Pope John Paul II said, "The search for truth is so rooted in the human experience, to be obliged to ignore it would be to cast our very existence into jeopardy." "How can you say your truth is better than our truth?" sings the popular folk rock fan Mumford & Sons. We live in a culture of relativity, where truth is a continually moving target. Our culture has given up on truth and bought into a postmodern relativistic way of thinking. Today, truth is limited only to what can be tested or what can be seen. Therefore, science and reason alone are held to be truth. Things like faith or morality are viewed as merely individual preference. At Pacifica, we believe that all truth is God's truth. And so we will freely bring before you the last 2,500 years of human thought and experience. We do this with great confidence, knowing that as you understand and know these things, you will find its foundation either in Scripture or in revelation of God's created world. Therefore, what we ask you to do is to learn that faith and reason are complements, and that the pursuits of the mind and the passions of the heart work together to help you see more clearly, act more justly, and love more lavishly. So, students, I encourage you, do not be intimidated by truth. Rather, build the courage to say that one thing is good and another bad, that one thing is right while another wrong, that one thing is beautiful and yet another ugly. But you must live out this truth with grace and humility. Your convictions should not alienate you from those with whom you disagree, but they should work together to draw you closer. Allow your love for people, which I know you have, and your curiosity, which I also know you have, to keep you engaged in conversations that matter with people who matter. Like Aristotle, I want you to entertain a thought without accepting it. And like Jesus, I want you to love every single person that he puts in your path. Students, it's going to take time to fully realize God's grace and truth in your lives. As the great lion Aslan said to Lucy, day by day, nothing changes. But as you look back, everything is different. As I look back, exactly how the grace and truth of Jesus has transformed my life is still a mystery. But I've learned some things about this beautiful mystery. Through all things, Jesus will never leave you nor forsake you. He's with you always, providing just what you need, exactly when you need it. In the moment, it's going to be hard sometimes to recognize his presence or even his grace. But over time, you will come to understand his faithfulness. Over time, you will come to find Christ's commandments and proclamations of truth as real grace in your lives, not rules or regulations. And his love and mercy as foundational truths that will see you through all of life's circumstances. Someday, as you look back, you will see how everything in your life is different. And the gift of grace and truth is the most precious thing you've ever received. Over time with Jesus, you will come to know that it's not grace alone or truth alone, but in all things it is grace and truth that renew our weary souls. As many of you know, I grew up an atheist. And I did not come to believe in the Christian faith until my college years. My father, also an atheist, was a great man. And for good reasons we don't have time to explore here tonight, he decided to challenge my new faith when I was in college. So he committed to reading several books on the Christian faith that I had, reading the Bible, attending church, and basically acting like a Christian for the next 6 months of his life. And his goal was to stand before me at the end of this time and tell me, David, there is no God. So I gave him my books, a Bible, and a list of churches. And then I boarded a plane for France, where I'd be studying for the next 6 months. During this time, he read every book I gave him. I think he read Mere Christianity 30 times. He read the Bible, he attended church, and we would talk by phone every once in a while, maybe every 2 weeks, to hear about his updates and his thoughts. During one of these calls, my father, with great anger and frustration in his voice, told me, I hate your God. He went on to tell me about Jeff, a man that worked for him, a wonderful man. He had 3 children. He was an elder in his church. He worked with the youth. David, he said, Jeff died today. Why would God do this? Why such pain? Why such suffering? I didn't know what to say. So I said the only thing I knew. I don't know, Dad. This is cute, what you and I are doing, but I'm done. And he hung up. A week later, I got a phone call from my dad. He was crying. I went to Jeff's funeral today. He said to me, it was beautiful. So many people came out to pay their respects and love for him. Towards the end of the service, this 12-year-old boy walked up in front of me and a relative of his, and he started to tell this relative about the love of God and how he missed his father. But he told the relative that he knew that God had plans for his dad, and if he needed him in heaven, then he knew that God would take care of him here today on earth. At this time, my dad began to sob, as did I. David, I am 40 years old, and I have never known the peace that this 12-year-old boy has. I so desperately want this in my life. 3 weeks later, my dad became a Christian. And he lived the rest of his life with the peace that he so longed for. One man's death, another man's new life. What a mystery. Dear friends, students, classes of 2018 and 2019, enter into this mystery of God's grace and truth over a lifetime. And as you do, I promise you that God will use every aspect of your life to show a hurting and broken world his love and his mercy. Jesus said to his disciples, you are the salt of the earth, and I say to you, be the salt of the earth. Society needs your standards, your convictions. Do not be intimidated into tolerating what is ugly or bad or untrue. Eschew bad advice. Live life to the full. Take risks. Learn new things. Have wonderful experiences. And stand courageously for all that is true, all that is good, and all that is beautiful. It is my great honor to come alongside each and every one of you in the classes of 2018 and 2019 over the next 3 to 4 years. I'm deeply thankful for your commitment and to being founders, and it is a joy. At this time, I have the distinct privilege of introducing to you another founder, Miss Davia Walker. Miss Walker was the first student to sign up for Pacifica Santa Monica. She was also Santa Monica's founding student body president. In future years, a student body president will arise from this group, and you will address us here next year. But until then, Ms. Davia Walker is going to encourage you and challenge you on what it means to be a founder. So please join me in welcoming Ms. Davia Walker.